OnEducation's FETC 2020 coverage is sponsored by Fidgets. Fidgets are interactive USB sensors that bring your code to life. There's no soldering or wiring required. Simply plug in a Fidget sensor, write code in your favorite language, and watch your ideas come alive. Fidgets are used by thousands of STEM professionals globally and are now available for computer science students. Simply go to bit.ly/Fidgets on Education to get your introductory kit that includes a free sensor worth over $50. That's bit.ly/Fidgets on Education.
You talked about intent and you talked about conversations.
Yes.
Both of those don't change anything. It's the action and it's the work.
All right, everybody, welcome to the podcast. We are joined at FETC with Tom Murray. Tom is the Director of Innovation at Future Ready Schools.
Good morning. Good morning. It's awesome to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I was just saying this has been like the Future Ready month, sort of, because we had Carl at Impact, and then we've had Brianna Hodges, just like you're following Brianna Hodges, which is always tough. I know what that's actually like.
Well, don't hold me to that standard because I have no idea. I've never heard of those two.
So introduce yourself. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself, your background.
I spent 15 years in public schools in Pennsylvania, everything from a teacher at the elementary level, a teacher at the middle school level, principal at the middle school level, principal at the elementary school level. And then I went over to district office and worked at the district level for a number of years. I obviously couldn't keep a job, so now I work in Washington, D.C. So it's like a perfect fit, right? So I will tell you, I was never looking to leave the classroom. Opportunities came. I was never looking to be in a principal or to leave and being a principal, and opportunities came.
Sure.
I was never looking to leave district office, and opportunities came. And so now I get to work nationally running Future Ready Schools as Director of Innovation, which I absolutely love, because no matter where I go in the United States or in Canada, wherever the case may be, there's amazing people working hard for kids, which makes my job enjoyable. I try and push their thinking, but also support them, because what I know about educators is they work insanely hard. They're asked year after year to seemingly do more and more with less and less. And if I have an environment that I can help support them, I'm there to do what I can.
Yeah, could you tell us more about just what is the Future Ready Schools? I mean, like,
Sure.
What is that program? What is the...
Sure. So for people that are listening, I encourage you to check out futureready.org. And first and foremost, I'll say we don't sell anything. I get the question all the time of what's the catch.
Yeah.
And, we are one of the few organizations out there that provide everything that we do for free. Now, on the flip side, it has to be funded in different ways. So we have large grant funders that fund a lot of the work that we do. We have a lot of corporate partners that fund the work that we do. But even in that realm, we don't sell anything that they do by any means. It's really ways for them to give back. It's their foundations and those kinds of things. So when you look at Future Ready is really a culmination of a lot of organizations that are out there. When I worked all those years in a school district, one of the things that I was naive is like how many nonprofits were out there. And I think when I got recruited to go to DC, I was really naive to the point of, I thought nonprofits, they all just played well together and they must just all just want to help and support people. But just like schools, they're as territorial as can be, and kind of that's my space and not your space. And so Future Ready is really a collaboration of many, many organizations.
Yeah.
So if you're a principal, it's NAESP, NASSP, which do incredible work for our principals. We're not there to compete with them. We're there to work with them, support them, collaborate on different things. So being here at the FETC conference, FETC is a partner of ours. So, here at the conference, we will do a variety of strands related to everything from librarians to instructional coaches to leadership oriented. So the leadership strand, myself and Joe Sanfilippo, who's one of our Future Ready advisors, are doing sessions that are really meant for superintendents. So the workshop I did this morning was all superintendents, principals, and higher level admin. And so we'll partner with conferences like that to bring great content, to push thinking, but at the same time to also provide resources. We also do a variety of events each year. Typically, we'll do about 6 what are called institutes. They are totally free events. Districts just have to get themselves there. And the reason we stand behind that is because we know that if we were to say to everybody, it's going to cost $500 a ticket, kind of like your average conference that's out there, we know which districts would go and which districts can't go.
100%.
And so core to our work is equity. And so we really, at that core, want to make sure that regardless of where I am, maybe I'm that small, tiny rural district and I am the administrator in that district. I'm that person. Or maybe, I'm that large urban district or whatever the case might be. We don't want equity to get in the way of us helping to support them.
I love that.
So from everything from events, and we recognize you don't go to something for 2 days and everything magically changes. We're not naive. But it's a great shot in the arm. It's a great kickoff. It's a great way to bring a team together. together, a planning team to vision, to plan, and then to really set that tone moving forward. But we also provide a lot of tools and a lot of resources. For instance, our Future Ready dashboard has been used by a few thousand school districts. It is completely free. It is a great visioning, strategic planning type tool, endorsed by the U.S. Department of Education for Title IV funding and some of those other types of things. And so really it's helping them vision, helping them plan, giving them the resources, giving them some experiences. But I would say at the end of the day, one of the things we really pride ourselves in is being practitioner driven.
Yes.
I'll tell you, when I was in Pennsylvania in a district level, if somebody said, hey, something from Washington, D.C., I would have laughed and been like, I'm not interested. You know, and so it has to be practitioner driven. So I referenced Joe Sanfilippo earlier. Joe Sanfilippo and Suzanne Lacey, two amazing award-winning superintendents. They run our district leadership strand. And so it's very much grounded in practice.
They've done the work.
Very much grounded in evidence. It's the people doing the work.
Right.
It's not your 50,000 foot, never been there, never done it, but I'm going to tell you what to do, typical Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
We want to be the complete antithesis of that. And so great events, great resources, great tools without selling anything. There is no catch. And so I think it's why we're now 5 years in the making. And I think, you know, it's why it's more than just a project or a handful of events. It's why places have been willing to invest in it so we can turn around and support schools.
I mean, it can't be underrated how important it is that the people that you have working with you, well, they are some of the best, that we've seen. And they've done the work, like Brianna and Carl, like these folks, they know, and they, especially someone like Carl who has like experienced so many different things, he can speak to situations that you're going through and say, okay, well, you know, I've kind of been through this, and this is like that kind of advice is priceless, right?
Yeah. And I think, you know, for us, it's keeping it real, you know, and, you know, it's so easy to stand on some platform, stand on some stage, or be at some 50,000 foot level and just say, well, just do this. If you just do that, everything. But if you don't know the day-to-day grind, and you don't know how hard people are working, and you don't recognize the real roadblocks or the lack of funding or the equity issues that they face, it's easy to make all these judgments without understanding what it's really like. And so we want to keep it very much practitioner-oriented, and I think that's why people have respected it. I think it's why we feel like we're doing the right work. This isn't a technology first. Sometimes people hear Future Ready and they initially jump to, this must be about going one-to-one in our districts. And, you know, technology and leveraging tech is one component of it, but it's not going to be more important than culture. It's not going to be more important than leadership. It's not going to be more important than pedagogy. And it's how do all those pieces come together? And, you know, the Future Ready framework is a great tool for that. I ran a workshop for a couple hours this morning, and somebody came up afterwards and said, finally, I feel like it's putting all the pieces together. Like they're all things we've talked about, but they almost often seem unrelated or different departments. Then they don't collaborate. So we take a look at things like curriculum instruction and assessment, or data and privacy, or robust infrastructure, or community partnerships, or the use of space and time, or all the different gears of the framework, and then provide resources and tools. It really creates this cohesive framework of support to support school and district leaders in the work that they're doing.
So very interested in everything that you're actually talking about. As a school district, we have a lot of conversations that I feel we all have the best intent. We all want to go ahead and do the best for our students. And yet often we're working in these kind of separated spaces, even at the district level, as far as I'm an instructional coach, the director of teaching and learning, director of technology, the superintendent, principals within those structures. And everybody has the best intent, but what you're describing basically is a way to go ahead and kind of pull us all in together and kind of formulate a plan to move together towards a common goal with some sort of direction too with it.
Well, and if you think of the words that you just used, and I would say it's so paramount in so many districts, you talked about intent and you talked about conversations.
Yes.
Both of those don't change anything. It's the action and it's the work.
Absolutely.
And so it's helping people get past, because how many times do we sit in a district? And for me, it was whether I was with my colleagues as a teacher, whether I was with my principal colleagues as a principal, or over district office in a cabinet level meeting. How many times do we talk about things and a year later, we're still talking about the same issues? And a year later, we're still talking about the same things.
Yes.
Well, it's the true definition of insanity. It's like you've got to create some force that shifts the issues that we're talking about.
Yes.
So it's meant to be very problem or like it's solution oriented, but recognizing the real problems. It's not coming at it like, here's your easy solutions. You know, take a look at something like home access. You know, in the United States, the Pew Research Center did something that's about 3 years old now, but they took a look at and estimated the amount of students in our country that did not have internet access at home. What they found was that about 5 million of our nation's families. So in the United States, there's about 29 million households that had school-aged children in the United States, and 5 million of them did not have the needed connectivity. Now, those numbers have probably shifted a little bit in the past couple of years, but if we take something like that, it's not an easy solution just to say, well, just hand every kid a hotspot. Like, it sounds great in theory, and some places are doing that, and that's a great avenue related to it. But what if I'm a district that has 7,000 kids that aren't connected? Well, all of a sudden that becomes a budget buster real quick.
Sure.
So it's taking these real world issues and helping districts to really think through those kinds of things, and then also amplifying the amazing work that's happening. You know, for every time a district says we can't do that or that's not possible, there's a district somewhere else that's crushing it in that area. And so how do you amplify the great stories to help others and give them some hope to show them that they're doing? And this isn't just the wealthy suburban districts saying, look at us and the things we're doing. It's taking those that have traditionally marginalized groups or have very low SES or those kinds of things and showing, like, look at the awesome things they're doing as well.
Wow.
So you just released a book recently. Like, of all the things going on, a book just came out too.
I did. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank
It's
you.
very exciting. Personal and authentic. I mean, even the title alone seems to suggest that this is a pretty serious book, pretty personal. I don't know what other word to use. And some of the stories, even talking off air, that you've been telling me are pretty incredible. Talk about the book. Talk about your thought process in writing it.
Sure.
And a little bit about that, I guess.
So when I take a look at the book, if anybody's ever seen it, the whole idea, don't judge a book by its cover, but I will say it's often a first impression. And I spent a lot of time, what is it, when I think personal and authentic, when I think about what that really means, what that means to me. But then I thought about what are the key messages in the book that I wanted to get across. And one of the main themes throughout is not letting educators forget of the impact that they have. You know, they are continuously running and going and going. I mean, they chose a profession. They can't even go to the bathroom during the day when they need to go. You know what I mean? And if we took what educators do on a daily basis and then said, hey, we're going to underpay you and overwork you, who signs up? There's millions of people that sign up to say, I will do it. And because that shows the heart that they have. And so part of it is showing them and reminding them and encouraging them and inspiring them around the impact that they don't have to have, they get to have, and it's a choice that they make every day. So on the cover of the book are 2 fingerprints, and they also personally represent, and I didn't share this in the book at all, but they personally represent my son and my daughter. That's for me on that end. But when you think about a fingerprint, it's authentic, like no two are the same. When you think about a fingerprint, it's personal in nature. But for me, the analogy being a fingerprint, and their fingerprints of impact get to be left on generations to come. And I think it's just something when you're in the day-to-day grind you lose sight of. You know, in those moments that are hard, in those moments when you're grading something on a Saturday morning, when you're there till 10 o'clock at night on a Thursday night, and you're driving home and you have nothing left for your own kids when you get home, you lose sight of it in those moments, just like I did as a teacher. And so I wanted to be real. I will tell you, I was definitely vulnerable throughout the book. I don't tell one story in the entire book where I did something well, because people, to me, when it's just, hey, look at me and pat myself on the back, you know, first of all, that's one of the biggest turnoffs I have. If I'm seeing somebody on a stage and they're patting themselves on the back the entire time, like, I'm out. Like, it's just
kids' success and it's centered around you.
Exactly. And so for me, I tell a lot of stories of where my mindset was off. A lot of times where I had, it was kind of my way or the highway, or times as a principal where I just screwed up a call and had to own it and just realize what I learned in that, whether it was a observation where my mindset was off, or, you know, when I was a teacher and I made a bad call, or when I did get kind of kicked in the butt by a mentor type of thing, because people can relate to that. People, you know, I think people can relate to humility, but also can say, you know, I've kind of been there too. I've been that person that's been negative in the faculty room. I've been that person. And so I just wanted to be real, but I also wanted it to be a different type of book. What's interesting, so my last book that I wrote with Eric Scheninger is Learning Transformed. And that's a very, very different book. It's very research to practice. What does it look like? So it's very big picture, kind of pushing with the why, almost philosophical, but then down to like, what does it look like? I wanted this one to be much more story and narrative, where that one's much more like leadership, district leadership kind of oriented. This one, I wanted to write something that would be just as relevant for a first-year kindergarten teacher and a 35-year veteran physics teacher, or a principal, or even a superintendent. And so it really gets to the heart of why we do what we do, and that's loving and caring about kids. But creating this framework around relationships being at that core, understanding culture, and helping people understand, like, how do you impact the culture every day? Sometimes, when we think about culture, sometimes you'll see 50 people pointing the finger at one person. Maybe it's the principal saying, well, you know, if that person would just leave, this would be a perfect place. And it's funny because on one hand, toxic leadership is an absolute real thing. I'm not going to demean it at all. But what if those 50 people did everything they could every day to make it the greatest place to work? You know, it's easy to point the finger. It's really hard to look at ourselves. And so helping people be reflective, but moving from relationships and culture to ultimately one of the things that I talked about, and like we were talking about this a little bit earlier, is around, for instance, the hidden stories within. You know, for me, it's real personal. My daughter daughter, and I share it even at 9 years old. I asked her permission to be able to share it. But part of her story, she was born with incredible food allergies. She has been hospitalized 3 times for less than 1 seed of sesame. So first time we didn't know she had an allergy. She was 10 months old at the time. She accidentally ingested hummus, and within a minute and a half, she was unrecognizable. She couldn't breathe, and we almost lost her that day because we didn't have any EpiPens. We were just young parents, first child, didn't know. And so, over time, we've been so protective. So my kind of daddy bear comes out there. Yeah. The reason I share that is I share part of her story. My wife found this thing called OIT. It's oral immunotherapy. It's this new innovative treatment for food allergies. And I share how, she missed 35 days of school. She was late 20 times in 15 months. And if we just look at the data, a lot of times we'll look at data for kids and we make all these judgments. And so a lot of times what I'll do with educators now talking about the book is I'll put the data on the screen. They have no idea it's my daughter. Yeah. And I'll put it on there. And what judgments do we make? And we hear like parents don't care, kid is lazy, maybe they're pregnant, maybe they're taken care of. And then I flip to the next day and say, all right, that's my daughter. Let's talk about it. And the room goes quiet. And it's like, so now you want to know what? You want to know why. Yeah. And what if I told you in every one of those 35 absences, she was in a doctor's office 2 hours from home? What if I told you in almost every one of those tardies, like she was in a doctor's office, got back to school by 1 o'clock? And so I make this analogies of the hidden stories within. So I use my daughter's example of, here we are 15 months later after all those therapies. She now eats 2,000 seeds of sesame every single day to keep her safe. Wow. So it's an amazing new piece to it. And she's had some other allergies and whatnot. But the reason I share that is when she would get back to school after being in therapy in the morning, she'd get there about 1 o'clock and they'd be in math, and she couldn't just drop that whole morning of being in therapy and be like, all right, I'm ready for division, because she's a kid and, and she's got a lot on her mind. And there's days she'd be like, Daddy, I just wish I was a normal kid. Like I didn't want, and then I couldn't thank enough her second grade teacher and her third grade teacher, who didn't just hand her 5 worksheets and say, here's what you missed this morning, who didn't just say, now you got to do this tonight. They just loved her and they just cared on her and just saw her who she was. And so, when it got it back, it was kind of like, don't worry about it, I got you, and then they'd sit side by side and help her. And so it shows there the impact of a teacher. And I get emotional talking about it because it's my daughter, it's my little girl. Of course. But then I make the analogy too, because I get it. It's not just, people don't want to just read about Tom's life. I understand that, and if nobody would want to read that book, I get that. But it's an example of every child that walks into our classrooms has a story. Every child that walks into our classroom has things on their heart. Sometimes they're really good things, but sometimes they're not. And do we choose to see the hidden stories in other people, or do we just see it inside of ourselves? Wow. And the other thing there is the same thing with our staff. When I was a principal, did I have the empathy for staff? The staff member that's going through a divorce, the staff member whose spouse is struggling with cancer, the staff member, and then we expect them to drop everything at the front door and be this perfect person for kids. But you've got to respect and understand, like, people are human and things happen. And so it's understanding and having empathy. And one of the things that I wrote in the book, because I really believe the difference between making a judgment and having empathy is understanding the story. And so how do we help understand people's stories? And I'm not talking about every day being like this drama dump and like a reality TV show. But what I'm talking about is seeing people first. And so, when kids walk through our hallways, do we see data points and test scores, or do we see the hearts of children? And so as we think through those pieces, we then did a lot of research on, like, what does personal authentic really look like? Like, how do people do that? And it's where I created things around social emotional learning, such as cultural relevance or interests and passions and strengths, or, authentic feedback, and just kind of all the ways I could think of. I will tell you though, I add some co-authors for different sections because it was just the right thing to do. For instance, when I talk about something like cultural relevance, I recognize I'm a white male that came from middle-class America, whose family took him on vacation a week every year. I never worried about my next meal. I went to a school district, was great. I had great teachers growing up. I fully recognize that privilege in that regard, and I recognize many, many people do not have that and did not have that. Yeah. So I reached out to Rosa Perez Isaiah. She's an incredible educator in California. Her life experience is very, very different than mine. And so she wrote that section where I wrote basically the first paragraph and said, hey, as a white male, I have one lens. Let me give you some data that's out there, but I can't talk about cultural relevance without amplifying the voices of people that get it far more than I do. And so I think it's recognizing my own lens in that sense and just saying, look, there's other people's voices. Ken Shelton, who's here at FETC, Ken's a great friend of mine. Ken does just amazing work around equity and equity barriers. And in one of the chapters around technology and learning spaces and other things, we talk about and address equity. But again, I could not author that section on my own, having not lived some of the things that I would want to talk about, and Ken has. And so Ken co-authored that section with me because his lens is different than mine. And so with that, it was really important to amplify the voices of other people. So I guess the last thing that I'll say is throughout the book, I really wanted it to be very practical. So if I'm that second grade teacher, what's something I could do tomorrow in the classroom? And so basically at the end of every section are these try this. It's kind of these bulleted points of like, all right, if I was your principal giving you some recommendations, here's some things that I could think of. But throughout the book, there's over 50 voices amplified, diverse voices, principals, teachers,
It's amazing.
That are 2 and 3 sentence tidbits of like, try this. If you're doing something with spaces, try that. And so there's a lot of voices that are amplified throughout, because to me, that's so important. And if I'm going to talk about being personal and authentic, it can't just be Tom's voice. And so I want people leaving encouraged and inspired, ready to run through walls for kids. But I also want them to help overcome adversity, and when I talk about things like failing forward and legacy and those kinds of things, it's helping people understand the work is insanely hard, but our kids are absolutely worth it.
Yeah. No, God.
What a difference a good, compassionate, caring teacher makes. Like, your story is unbelievable. And I think back to my time in the classroom, and we were talking with Desiree Alexander a few minutes ago, and I was sharing the same story, and I've been reflecting on my time in the classroom a lot since I've been out of it the last couple of years. And I think you need kind of be outside of it a little bit to think back. And man, I missed so many things because I wasn't looking through them with the right lens. The lens that you're talking about and that Desiree's talking about is, the difference is everything. You never know what kids are going through.
Yep. And I think, and more we're just seeing the trauma that our kids have. And that's why the trauma informed has really had such a push in the last number of years, as it should be. Yeah. And I think a lot of things, just on a real serious note, a lot of the school shootings that we've had in the United States and those complete tragedies have forced things on the radar. I think great schools have always focused on the notion of that whole child idea, the social emotional side of things. One of the things I wrote in the books, I really believe, like, the moment we care more about what we teach than who we teach, we've totally lost the purpose in the work. And so when we think about that, it's seeing kids' hearts and not just their minds. And, you could be the greatest person when it comes to standards and content and be able to recite things from memorization frontward and backward, but that doesn't make you remotely a good teacher. So it's how do you see, and not to say that the standards and content are not important. Of course they are. But if you know all the standards and the content, but you don't like kids, like, I don't want you around my kid in the classroom. Right. I'd rather have that person that cares, that can model that failing forward, that can model that growth. And of course you have to have competent understandings of it. Of course, that goes without saying. But at the end of the day, what do we see when we look in front of us? And I think one of the things I shared in that opening chapter around relationships, I share a handful of tragedies that occurred during my very first year that my superintendents say, you've been through more in this first year than many people go through in a career. And I will tell you, it really impacts my lens and how I saw the world and really our purpose of our work. But one of the things I wrote there is that, I had to really change my lens from what I taught to who I taught to really see the real work come into focus.
So where can, if people want to reach out to you, connect with you, learn more about you, learn more about Future Ready, share all that? Where can people buy the book, all of that, that good stuff? Share that out.
So Future Ready, I encourage you to check out futureready.org. If you want to go to futureready.org/connect, it'll actually just ask kind of who you are, how do you want the information. It links to a document that has all of our resources on one page, so you can link right off of that. Encourage you to check it out. Again, bipartisan nonprofit here in the U.S., but if you're international or Canada or anywhere in the world, you're welcome to use it. It's just there to really help kids at the end of the day. Personally, you can check out the website at Thomas C. Murray. I'm real proud to have just opened up a store around personal and authentic. And when I say that, I want to instantly follow it up with 100% of the donations are going to food allergy research treatments and awareness.
Very cool.
And so it's a real personal way to say, here's a platform that I want to leverage to bring awareness to something my baby girl struggles with every day. So as a daddy, I can support her first and foremost.
Oh, powerful.
Tom Murray, thanks so much for joining us. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for listening to OnEducation. My name is Glenn Irvin. My co-host is Mike Washburn. OnEducation is part of the On Podcast Media Network. You can listen to this show and many others by great educators like Monica Burns, Mike Matera, Tisha Richmond, and many more by visiting onpodcastmedia.com. Want to get in touch with us? Check out our website at oneducationpodcast.com. You can tweet us at OnEducationPod. Mike is at Mr. Washburn on Twitter, and I can be found on Twitter at IrvSpanish. You can find us on Facebook by visiting facebook.com/OnEducationPod. We're also on Instagram @OnEducationPod. If you're enjoying the show and think others would too, we would be thrilled if you shared it with them. Please leave us a rating or review in Apple Podcasts or the Google Play Store. When you leave a rating, it gives our rankings a boost. This helps others discover the show. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Classcraft, for supporting us. Check out classcraft.com/OnEducation to learn more about them. Thanks as always for listening. Stay awesome and see you soon.